Right now, it feels like we're just swimming in headlines, doesn't it? A constant stream.
It really does, nonstop.
And you want to be informed, you want to know what's shaping things, but honestly, keeping up and figuring out
Right.
what actually matters. It feels like a full-time job sometimes.
It absolutely can, yeah. Overwhelming.
Well, that's pretty much why we're here. Today, we're going to dive deep into quite a collection of current events. We've got 18 distinct stories lined up.
18? Wow. That's quite a spread.
It is. Each one has its own, key details, maybe some surprises tucked away. So our mission today, simple. Navigate all this noise, pull out the key insights you need, basically, understand what's going on, and importantly, why it matters.
Makes sense.
And these stories, they're all over the map,
Yeah.
literally across continents, touching on big international deals, right down to really local stuff. It kind of highlights how interconnected things are. Or sometimes how surprisingly separate.
It's true. The range in these 18 stories is pretty striking, geographically, thematically. It gives you a real sense of, well, just how complex things are right now, all the different challenges and developments happening at once.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Where should we start?
How about we head over to Ukraine first?
Okay, Ukraine. There's been a pretty significant agreement made there recently. It's called the United States-Ukraine Reinvestment Fund.
Right.
And this deal, it seems to focus on giving the U.S. access to Ukraine's mineral resources, especially those really crucial rare earth minerals.
That's the core of it.
Now, the specifics, the exact structure of the deal, there's still a bit, well, under wraps, not a lot of detail out there yet.
Details are scarce.
But the main goal seems pretty clear, secure access to these, vital materials.
And what's really noteworthy about this U.S.-Ukraine deal is, well, the timing and the whole context around it.
How so?
Well, first, it sends a strong signal, right? Continued U.S. support for Ukraine right in the middle of the war with Russia.
Yeah, that's significant.
Especially with all the talk, the uncertainty about potential shifts in U.S. foreign policy down the line.
Right. And President Trump's previous frustrations with both countries adds another layer.
Exactly. That background is definitely relevant. And then there's the strategic piece, rare earth minerals. I mean, you can't overstate how important they are.
They're in everything now, aren't they?
Pretty much. Smartphones, electric cars, advanced military gear, you name it. So by securing access through this fund, the U.S. is making a very long-term strategic move. It's a competitive world out there for these resources.
Okay, so a big strategic play. Let's move a bit westward now to Estonia.
Okay.
They've just received their first shipment, the first 6 U.S.-made HIMARS rocket launchers. They arrived at Amari Air Base.
Ah, the HIMARS. Big news for them.
Definitely. It's a major upgrade for Estonia's military, giving them, significant long-range precision strike capability.
Yeah, this HIMARS delivery to Estonia, it really carries a lot of weight, especially now.
In the current climate, you mean?
Absolutely. It's the first delivery like this to a Baltic state, which really underscores the heightened security concerns in that whole region ever since Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Makes sense. And the U.S. helped fund this.
Partially, yes. U.S. security assistance was involved, which, again, shows a clear commitment, to boosting the defenses of NATO allies on that eastern flank.
And Estonia is doing more on its own, too.
They are. They're increasing defense spending, and they're actually working with Latvia and Lithuania. The plan is for all three to get 20 HIMARS launchers in total. It's a unified Baltic effort.
20 total? Wow.
And importantly, this isn't just dropping off equipment. U.S. troops have been training Estonian forces on these systems since 2022, so it's a deeper integration.
Got it. Okay, now for something quite different, an unusual incident in the Red Sea involving the USS Harry S. Truman.
Oh, what happened there?
Well, aboard the carrier, an FA-18E Super Hornet, and the tractor that tows it, they somehow went overboard, just fell off the deck.
Went overboard. Seriously, was anyone hurt?
Thankfully, just a minor injury reported. But yeah, the jet and the tractor into the sea. And it's worth noting, the Trumans have been very active there. Daily flight ops against Houthi targets, part of Operation Rough Rider.
Right, so it's an active operational zone. Losing a Super Hornet overboard, that raises some serious questions.
Definitely. There was an initial report, maybe not accurate, suggesting a dynamic maneuver to avoid enemy fire might have caused it.
A dynamic maneuver. But
Then a Defense Department official came out and basically questioned how a secured aircraft could just slide off during a ship's maneuver. They said standard procedures should account for turns, weather, that kind of thing.
that makes sense. You'd expect aircraft to be properly secured, especially during operations. So they're doubting the initial story.
Seems like it. They've launched a full investigation to figure out exactly what happened. Losing a sophisticated jet like that, plus the tractor, it's a big deal, financially and potentially for readiness, too.
Absolutely. They'll need to understand the cause to prevent it happening again. Very serious.
Okay, shifting gears and oceans. Let's head to the Pacific. Papua New Guinea.
Right. What's happening there?
The U.S. Department of Defense is funding a pretty big project, a $400 million fuel storage facility.
$400 million. That's significant. How much fuel?
Capacity is nearly 70 million gallons.
Yeah.
Huge. And this comes out of that defense agreement the U.S. and Papua New Guinea signed back in 2023.
Ah, okay. So it's part of that growing partnership.
Exactly. U.S. Armed Forces will have access to the facility. It's being built by a Virginia company, DGCI Corp., and should be done by 2030.
This Papua New Guinea facility, it really highlights the strategic focus on the Indo-Pacific for the U.S.
How so?
Well, having a major fuel depot there, accessible to U.S. forces, gives them critical logistical advantages. It extends the Navy's reach and, endurance in a really vital area.
And wasn't there an issue with a fuel facility in Hawaii recently?
Exactly, the Red Hill facility closure. So this move towards more distributed fuel storage, like in Papua New Guinea, makes a lot of strategic sense. It builds a more resilient supply network in the Pacific, and of course deepens that security cooperation with PNG.
Got it. Okay, let's bring it back home to the U.S. Specifically, Massapequa, Long Island, New York.
Okay, Massapequa. What's the story?
There's a controversy heating up. The local school district is refusing to follow a New York state mandate. The mandate says they have to retire Native American sports names and mascots.
And what's their mascot?
Chiefs. So they're digging in their heels. And they've actually filed a federal lawsuit, along with 3 other districts.
On what grounds?
They're arguing it violates their First Amendment rights, free speech.
The mascot debate. That's always complex. This Massapequa situation really kind of captures that clash, doesn't it? Local tradition versus cultural sensitivity, plus constitutional arguments.
Yeah, and the district's resistance shows how attached some communities are to these symbols.
Right. But then you have other perspectives, like the article mentioned a Chickasaw Nation member who actually grew up in that town.
What do they say?
They found the specific imagery, the headdress they used, to be inaccurate and disrespectful. It highlights the real harm these things can cause, the misrepresentation.
And the politics are getting involved, too.
Seems so. The Trump administration is apparently investigating alleged state discrimination because New York threatened funding cuts. So a local issue gets tangled up in bigger national debates about identity, speech.
Right. Complex stuff. Okay, now for something a little lighter. Maybe quirkier. Rockport, Massachusetts.
Quirky, how?
Residents there are dealing with a very determined pileated woodpecker.
A woodpecker? What's it doing?
It's developed this weird habit. It's attacking and breaking the side mirrors on cars.
Breaking mirrors? Seriously?
Yeah, over 24 so far. And it even broke at least one car's side window.
Wow. Is that normal woodpecker behavior?
Apparently not this glass attacking thing. It's reportedly new for the area. No one's quite seen it like this before.
Huh. That's fascinating. Why would it do that? Territorial, maybe? Seeing its reflection?
Could be. It makes you wonder what's triggering it, but the interesting part is the residents' reaction.
Are they angry? Trying to get rid of it?
Yeah, apparently they're more amused than anything. They're putting bags or towels over their mirrors to protect them, but nobody seems to want to harm the bird.
That's kind of nice, actually. Tolerance and maybe a bit of fascination with this odd bird behavior. A little reminder of how wildlife interacts with our world in unexpected ways.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, heading south now, Florida.
All right, Florida, what's the news?
State lawmakers there have passed a bill that would ban adding fluoride to public drinking water.
And fluoridation. Wow. Is that common?
Not really. If Governor Ron DeSantis signs it, Florida would only be the second state to do it. Utah just did recently.
Okay. Why are they doing this?
Well, it seems the DeSantis administration has raised concerns before about potential impacts of fluoridation on kids' intellectual development. That seems to be a driving factor.
The fluoride debate. That's been around forever, hasn't it?
It has. And this Florida bill reflects those concerns some people have about safety, necessity, individual liberty arguments.
And you have figures like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. who've been really vocal nationally against fluoridation, right? That probably adds fuel to it.
Yeah. But then you have the other side.
The dentists and public health folks.
Right. Most major dental and public health groups worldwide still say it's safe, cost-effective, and really good at preventing cavities, especially in kids.
So it's that classic tension. Individual worries versus broad public health recommendations, backed by a lot of science. This Florida situation really highlights that ongoing split.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift to Washington, D.C. Some personnel changes happening.
Yo, who's involved?
White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and his deputy, Alex Wong. They're reportedly leaving the administration.
Waltz and Wong. Okay. That's the first big staff shakeup in Trump's national security team this term, right?
That's right, first major one.
The departure of a national security advisor and their deputy. That's always something to watch. It can signal, potential shifts in policy or approach.
And there was some controversy around Waltz recently, wasn't there?
Yeah, the reported circumstances, especially that criticism over the private signal chat incident.
Right, with the journalist and the Houthi plans.
Exactly. Waltz claimed full responsibility, but said he didn't know how the journalist got added. That whole thing suggests maybe some internal pressures or disagreements.
And wasn't he also getting targeted by some figures, like Laura Loomer?
Yeah, for supposedly not being loyal enough to the, quote, MAGA agenda or relying on aides who weren't MAGA enough. It just shows the intense ideological pressure these officials can face. Changes like this at the top of national security can have real ripple effects.
Okay, sticking with D.C., but shifting to HHS, Health and Human Services.
All right, what have they put out?
They've released a really lengthy review.
Yeah.
And it basically advocates for prioritizing therapy over medical treatments for young people dealing with gender dysphoria.
Prioritizing therapy. Okay. And this ties into administration policy.
Yes, it aligns with President Trump's executive order that restricted federal support for gender transitions for anyone under 19.
Got it. So this HHS review reflects that specific viewpoint on, well, a very complex issue, healthcare for trans youth.
Right. It emphasizes therapy, raises questions about existing medical standards, like the WPATH standards.
WPATH, yeah, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health.
So the administration seems to be signaling a more cautious approach here, highlighting potential risks of medical interventions for minors.
But it's crucial to understand this view isn't universally held in the medical world, right?
Not at all. Major groups like the AMA, the American Medical Association, they see trans identities as normal variations. They support access to comprehensive care, therapy, yes, but also things like puberty blockers and hormone therapy when appropriate for young people.
So a real difference in approach there.
Definitely. And HHS did include a disclaimer. They said the report isn't clinical guidance and it doesn't cover adults. It's specifically about those under 19.
That's an important caveat. This whole area is just deeply personal, often contentious, and the understanding is still evolving.
Very much so. Okay, still in Washington. President Trump's been talking about the China trade war again.
Oh, yeah. What's the latest take?
Well, he acknowledged that his tariffs on Chinese goods could mean, fewer products for U.S. consumers, and they might cost more.
Did he give an example?
Yeah, he used that illustration about getting $2 instead of 30, kind of acknowledging the consumer impact. But he firmly believes China will suffer more economically, and he reassured people the tariffs wouldn't cause a recession here.
Even though there was that recent government report.
Right. The one showing a small economic contraction, about 0.3% in the first quarter.
So how did he explain that?
He blamed his predecessor and a surge in imports for the contraction, argued the U.S. doesn't need Chinese imports anyway, and the tariffs will ultimately boost the economy.
So he's sticking to his guns on the tariffs being good overall.
Completely. But, of course, you have the counter-argument.
From Democrats and maybe some economists.
Yeah. They point to that GDP report as evidence that the policies might actually be hurting the U.S. economy, harming investment, hitting manufacturers who need Chinese parts.
So the same data, completely different interpretations. That highlights the whole ongoing debate about whether these trade policies are actually working and for whom. No clear consensus.
Not at all. Okay, let's talk about Elon Musk for a moment. He's been defending DOGE.
DOGE. That's the Department of Government Efficiency he was heading up.
That's the one. The goal was downsizing the federal workforce, cutting spending, and he's defending it as he's apparently preparing to step back a bit from leading it.
Right. How's that initiative been going? Trying to streamline government seems like a massive task.
Well, Musk himself acknowledged it hasn't been quite as effective as they'd hoped initially.
But he's claiming some progress.
Yeah, says they made some headway. But it hasn't been smooth sailing. There have been lawsuits, apparently resistance from agencies like Social Security about accessing data.
That doesn't sound surprising. Bureaucracies can be resistant to change.
Right. And criticism about DOGE blocking funds, maybe overstating the savings achieved, It sounds like there's been significant pushback.
Including protests.
Yeah, even protests against Tesla, reportedly linked to the DOGE stuff.
Yeah.
It just shows the kind of challenges you face trying to make big reforms in government. Lots of entrenched interest, systemic inertia.
A very ambitious project, facing predictable hurdles, it seems.
Seems like it. Okay, let's pivot back to military policy here in D.C. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has ordered a major restructuring of the Army.
Oh, restructuring. What's the goal?
The stated aim is a leaner, more lethal force, and the focus is very clearly on countering China.
Leaner, more lethal China focus. Okay. What kind of changes are we talking about?
Several key things. Getting rid of older programs that aren't seen as relevant anymore. Merging headquarters to reduce bureaucracy. Trimming the number of generals. And trying to streamline how they buy new equipment and tech.
Streamlining acquisition is always a goal. Any specific changes to force structure?
Yes, quite significant. They're reducing the number of manned attack helicopter units, the AH-64 Apaches.
Reducing Apaches, what replaces that capability?
They plan to augment them with, and this is the quote, inexpensive drone swarms.
Drone swarms. Okay, that's a big shift. Reflects modern warfare trends.
Definitely. There are also cuts to some armor units, other aviation units, but they're prioritizing things like long-range precision missiles, homeland missile defense, they're calling that Golden Dome, and boosting the U.S. presence in the Indo-Pacific.
Wow, that's a fundamental reorganization. Really signals that strategic pivot towards China and adapting to new technologies like drones.
Yes.
Implementing that in a huge organization like the Army, that'll be a major undertaking, logistically, culturally.
No doubt. It shows a commitment to adapting, though.
For sure, staying adaptable is key.
Now, on a related but different military issue, there's been a drop in reported sexual assaults across the U.S. military.
A decrease. That sounds like positive news. By how much?
Nearly 4% overall in 2024 compared to 2023. The total number was about 8,195 reports last year.
Okay, a 4% drop. Is that across the board?
Interestingly, no. The overall decline seems to be mostly driven by the Army, which saw a big drop, 13%.
13% in the Army. Wow. What about the others?
The Navy actually saw an increase of 4.3%, Air Force up 2.2%, and the Marine Corps had a small increase, less than 1%.
So it's a mixed picture across the services. Why does the Pentagon think the overall number went down, especially with that big Army drop?
They're attributing the progress partly to significant investment in prevention programs, about $1 billion in 2023-24.
$1 billion. What kind of initiatives?
Things like setting up new prosecution offices that are outside the regular chain of command, hiring specialized personnel focused on prevention and response, though apparently there were some temporary hiring freezes for those roles.
Right. Those reforms, taking prosecution out of the chain of command, were intended to encourage reporting and build trust. So maybe that's starting to have an effect, at least in the Army.
Possibly. But the increases in the other branches and the fact that sexual harassment complaints actually went up slightly overall, it shows there's still a lot of work needed.
Absolutely. Creating a truly safe environment across all branches is clearly an ongoing challenge. Those specialized personnel are crucial, so hopefully those hiring issues get resolved.
Yeah. Okay, still with the military, but focusing on the civilian side now.
The civilian workforce, what's happening there?
Tens of thousands of civilian employees across all the branches have voluntarily resigned. They took buyouts through DoD programs.
Tens of thousands, voluntarily. Why?
It's part of that same push from Secretary Hegseth. His initiative aims to cut the total civilian workforce by about 60,000 people.
60,000 cuts to the civilian workforce. That's huge. What are the potential impacts of losing so many people, even voluntarily?
Well, the concern is it could have really significant impacts on readiness, on continuity. The Army could lose around 16,000, Air Force 12,000, Navy and Space Force maybe 10% each, Marine Corps about 1,600.
Those are big numbers. What kind of problems could that cause?
Concerns about gaps in just getting the mission done. Effects on vital support functions, think pay systems, military schools, logistics, maintenance, even recruiting could be impacted.
And those civilian roles often hold a lot of institutional knowledge, right? That experience walks out the door.
Exactly. And the report noted a potentially disproportionate effect on the Space Force, which really relies heavily on its civilian tech experts.
Right. So while the goal might be efficiency, there are real risks to operational effectiveness and just basic functioning if you lose that much expertise and manpower so quickly. Needs very careful management.
Definitely sounds like it. Okay, let's take a quick detour to Alabama.
Alabama. What's the story? Not military, I assume.
No, definitely not. A rather unexpected event on Interstate 85 in Macon County.
Okay.
A runaway kangaroo named Sheila.
A kangaroo in Alabama on the interstate.
Yep. Caused a temporary shutdown of I-85 for safety.
I bet it did.
Yeah.
Was the kangaroo okay? Did they catch her?
Yes. The owner managed to capture Sheila, apparently with help from state troopers. They even used a tranquilizer dart. So Sheila's safe now.
Wow. Sheila the kangaroo shutting down an Alabama interstate. That's unexpected. Just a reminder that weird things happen, I guess, and cause real, if temporary, disruptions.
Exactly. A little moment of the unusual. Okay, back to Texas now.
All right, Texas, SpaceX country.
Precisely. There's an election coming up soon to officially incorporate the area where Elon Musk's SpaceX facility is, down in South Texas.
Incorporated into what?
Into a brand new city. And the proposed name is Starbase.
Starbase, Texas. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it likely to pass?
Yeah, seems very likely. Apparently, a lot of the eligible voters there are SpaceX employees, so the incorporation is expected to succeed.
A company town, essentially, named Starbase. That raises some interesting questions, doesn't it? About governance, corporate influence?
It does. And there are growing concerns being voiced. People worry that creating this, company town could give Musk too much control over things like access to a nearby public beach.
Which beach is that?
One that's traditionally been known locally as the Poor People's Beach. So there's concern about public access being restricted.
That's a valid concern, especially with Musk's, let's say, fluctuating popularity and some of the challenges his other businesses are facing. Adds another layer to this Starbase idea.
For sure. Okay, let's head west. Hawaii.
Aloha! What's happening in Hawaii?
Lawmakers there are about to pass a bill to increase the state's hotel tax. It's called the Transient Accommodations Tax.
Raising the hotel tax by how much?
It's actually a fairly modest increase, an additional 0.75% starting January 1st.
Okay, 0.75%. What makes that particularly significant?
It's where the money is going. This is apparently the first time a state has done this.
Yeah.
All the new revenue from this specific tax hike is earmarked exclusively for climate change adaptation program.
All of it, dedicated just to climate adaptation. That is significant.
Yeah. As an island state, they're obviously very vulnerable. So the money will go to things like replenishing beaches, eroded by sea level rise, fortifying homes against hurricanes,
Makes sense. Real, tangible adaptation measures.
and also removing invasive species, especially ones linked to making wildfires worse, like we tragically saw with the Lahaina fire.
That's a really forward-thinking approach, using tourism revenue, which is huge for Hawaii, to directly fund resilience against climate impacts they're already facing. Could be a model for other places.
Could be. Okay, our final story takes us to California. Santa Ana.
All right, California, what's the event there?
There was a vigil and also a protest held outside the home of a man recently arrested,
Arrested for what?
allegedly for killing at least a dozen neighborhood cats.
Oh, that's awful. Killing neighborhood cats. I can imagine the community reaction.
Yeah, about 100 people turned out for the protest and vigil. Understandably very strong emotions.
Was it peaceful?
It was advertised as peaceful, but apparently there was some vandalism reported at the suspect's home afterwards.
That's unfortunate. Emotions run high in cases like that, but vandalism doesn't help.
Exactly. The police are urging calm now, warning against any further disturbances while the legal process takes its course. It just highlights how deeply people feel about animal cruelty and the distress it causes in a community.
Understandable reaction, but yeah, needs to stay lawful.
Right. Well, wow. That was a lot. A truly extensive look at just, a snapshot of what's happening right now.
It really was. 18 stories. It just underscores the sheer volume, the diversity of events shaping our world, literally moment by moment.
It does. And hopefully by kind of focusing in on the key parts of each of these, we've helped give you a clearer picture, a better handle on what's going on and, why it might be relevant to you.
That's the goal, yeah, to cut through some of that noise.
Exactly. And you look at all these stories, different topics, different places, it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Are there connections we missed? Any underlying themes tying some of these seemingly separate events together?
That's a great question for you, the listener, to think about. What patterns do you see when you consider all this together?
Yeah. Or maybe one specific story just really grabbed your attention.
Right. If something particularly piqued your interest, we really encourage you to dive deeper into that one on your own. Even just getting this kind of overview can be a fantastic starting point for, a much richer understanding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.